bangsa Indonesia. Dengan jiwa yang berseri-seri, mari berjalan terus, jangan berhenti, revolusimu belum selesai. Jangan berhenti, sebab siapa yang berhenti akan diseret oleh sejarah. Dan siapa yang menentang corak dan arahnya sejarah, tidak peduli dia ada bangsa apapun, dia akan digiling, digilas oleh sejarah itu sama sekali.
Banyak-banyak.
This program is quite interesting and very impactful because these programs invited so many renowned and international scholars around the world. And here we focus on the Islamic social finance and SDGs, not only for Indonesian case but also for the world.
It's wonderful to be here in this exciting event. Summer School, Second International Training for Young Islamic Economic Leaders. Al-Quran, Science and Civilizational Renewal, Integration and Quality Assurance. Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta.
So once again, and by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, hopefully this event will be conducted smoothly and we will get some benefit from this one.
Alhamdulillah, in IAUM, we managed to complete 10 textbook the last 2 years, but another 40 to 60 coming up at International Islamic University. And other universities like USM coming up with 6 textbook in quiz in Kuala Lumpur. And also here in Imam Bonjol, in Surakarta. And we hope that University Muhammadiyah Jogja will come up with any book with the number of resources that we have over here. So I hope based on this conference, more work can be done to improve the teaching and learning of Islamic economy in University Muhammadiyah. Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Saya berharap ke depannya event Summer School ini akan makin berkembang dan makin memberi impak yang lebih besar kepada para peserta.
I'm very happy to be with this program. I believe that the idea of developing young minds is very important for the future development of Islamic economics, not only in discipline but also in practice.
First of all, I would like to express my happiness in having you all in the third International Conference on Islamic Economics and Financial Inclusion. Welcome to our campus, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Adi Warman Karim. Ini acara keren banget. Ini mesti dibuat lebih gede lagi tiap tahunnya biar lebih banyak orang dapat manfaat dari acara ini. Nanti saya akan sampaikan Islamic Social Finance yang kita kaitkan dengan SDGs. Kita ingin berusaha mengangkat ilmu Islam dan kita tularkan ke semua teori-teori yang ada di dunia sehingga kita insya Allah umat Islam Indonesia bisa mewarnai dunia dengan pemikiran-pemikiran Islam.
Pada kesempatan kali ini dalam Forum International Conference yang diselenggarakan oleh IPF ya, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta, saya akan menyampaikan materi tentang Lagisme and SDGs, prospects and policies.
Thank you very much. I hope the organizer and the university will flourish and again to organize in this kind of conference in the near future. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share my paper on integration of Islamic microfinance with WAQF. And we had presented a model which is being practiced by our Center for Islamic Economics, basically called ITAJIR, which is in collaboration with the CIMB Islamic in Malaysia.
It's a good opportunity for me to attend this conference, the third conference Islamic Economic and Financial Inclusion. And it's a good opportunity for me also to bring my paper in this discussion, especially to link between Islamic finance and SDG.
Acara seminar internasional ini sangat bermanfaat ya bagi kalangan akademisi, kalangan mahasiswa untuk meningkatkan pengetahuannya, meningkatkan kualitas tulisannya khususnya tentang ekonomi keuangan syariah.
First, let me congratulate the organizing committee for choosing a topic that is very relevant today. As we know, in 2015, the United Nations formulated the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, whose idea is to bring people, planet, and prosperity together.
Acara ini sangat bagus, ya, terutama ketika topik-topiknya itu adalah sangat relevan pada zaman sekarang, dan topik-topik yang dibawa adalah topik-topik terhangat.
This agenda is very delightful, great, and it's very worth for me and also for other participants, because in 5 days, 8 to 8, we have many knowledge from the great speakers from overseas, and we know about Islamization of the knowledge in other world also. For the committee, I also say thanks very much, because you are very strong for 5 days here, and also very good to serve us as a participant.
So first of all, Alhamdulillah, because I got the Best Paper Awards. Although I got the Best Paper Award, it doesn't mean the other participants, their paper is not best. All the participants, they did their best, okay? So for me, Alhamdulillah, it's a kind of the reward from Allah SWT, because give me this opportunity to come here and present my idea. Alhamdulillah, my idea is appreciated, and also somehow is given some kind of the incentive for my papers.
Finally, I am personally, as director, want to express sincere thanks and appreciation to all of the parties that have contributed much to the success of this event. May Allah bless us and always give us health and iman. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hello, Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Okay, you can start inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Salatu wassalamu ala asrofil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Sayyidina wa maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. First of all, thank you to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala who has given us blessings today, so we can meet again in the best of iman and health. Secondly, salat and salam always be delivered to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his companion and ummah who is istiqomah through his way. And thirdly, on the behalf of International Program for Islamic Economic and Finance, Department of Economics, Faculty of Economic and Business, Universitas Muhammadiyah Jakarta, would like to express and extend our thanks to our guest here, Dr. Muhaizam from School of Economic, Finance and Banking, and also all participants, audiences here who have attended the event. In the midst of today is our Independence Day, Dr. Muhaizam.
Congratulations.
So, but because of the pandemic, we are not required to come to the ceremony. Usually, we have to come for the attending ceremonial activity during the Independence Day. Okay, dear participants, here, Alhamdulillah, we have our fourth public lecture series. It correspond with the third training for young Islamic economic leaders, ITLs, organized by our departments. And right now we have here our invited speaker from Universitas Utara Malaysia, not University of Malaysia, Dr. Muazzam. And before we start, I would like to just a bit read his curriculum vitae. That Dr. Muazzam currently is the UUM lectures, in particular in School of Economic, Finance and Banking, University Utara Malaysia. And his academic background, he was graduated from bachelor degree with honors from University Utara Malaysia, and also Master of Science, yeah, from University Utara Malaysia, and his PhD in Islamic Finance from INSAIF Malaysia. So Dr. Muazzam, before we start, for your information that this program actually was attended by more than 100 participants around from 13 countries, and the speakers also for around 15 speakers under 2 courses that offered to the participants, namely risk management and green economy. And you is the 4th speaker here under risk management course. And inshallah, in the next couple of days, we still have another 10 speakers that will be speaking about Islamic banking and also risk management, inshallah. And this program will be organized for around 3 weeks until 28th of August, inshallah. So the participant here not only just attending the public lectures, but also they should conduct such personal assessments, such as a short semester, doctor. Okay. So they are given some assignments, some quizzes, also academic evaluations through our online platforms. So university currently developing the online platform called My Class. So they assess all the materials, the content and video inside, and then they are evaluated by their performance through the My Class or the online platforms. Okay, doctor, because you have very limited times, please I give you, please you have maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes to share your slides, and also after that we'll continue with the question and answer sessions. Dr. Muazzam, time is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning. Happy Independence Day to students from Indonesia and lecturers from Indonesia. Okay, so let me, I want to share my slide if I could. Okay, so, okay, first of all, I would like to thank Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta for inviting me to become one of the invited speakers for today. So I want to share the slide. Okay. Let me make it bigger. Okay. Okay. All right. So okay, I'm sharing. All right, can you see my slide?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, all right, wonderful. Now, first of all, this program, which is the international training for young Islamic economic leaders, I believe the subject that you are taking, which is the risk management for Islamic and conventional banks, is very important, especially nowadays where banking has been transformed, not because of the pandemic situation that we are having, which is the pandemic coronavirus, but because we are moving towards digitalization of the banking in the whole world. So when we talk about digitalization, it will make the whole operations of banks, financial institutions, and also anything that is related to finance will change, not only in the operational side, but most importantly is the risk and regulation. So for today's lecture, which I will very honored to give to all of the students here taking this program, is about the nature of risk and regulation in banking. Now, before I go to the second slide, let me give you a little bit of brief what is happening to the digitalization of banks, not only in Malaysia, but also across the world. And how does it relate to risk and regulation? Now, when banks are changing into online banking, right now, a lot of people cannot go to banks, right? Because of the COVID-19. So we need what we call introduction or use of online banking. And when there is an online banking transaction, it will change the nature of operation of the banks, and it will actually increase the nature of risk and regulation. So when I talk about risk and regulation for bank, you must put in your mind what is happening right now across the world, which is we want to focus about digitalization process that the banks needs to know. But before because for example, a lot of talks about financial technology or fintech, and also regulation technology. But in order for everyone to understand what is happening about that financial technology, fintech, you need to get exposure of the basic of the nature of risk and regulation first. This is the most important thing. Everyone here needs to understand about the concept, especially when we talk about conventional banks versus Islamic banks, because Islamic banks' risk are different than conventional banks because of the Sharia principles, which we will go on later. So once you understand about the nature of risk and regulation, that's why I take this topic, then you can have a discussion about the financial technology, regulation technology, which is more of an advanced level. But for this training for today, I will give you a talk about the nature of risk and regulation in banking. Now, let us look into the introduction of the risk. Okay, so next slide is risk introduction, risk management introduction. Now, in banks, can you see the second slide, risk management introduction?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dimas. Now, in understanding risk, which is risk management, is very important for banks. So there are three kinds of framework, or three kinds of steps that is involved when we talk about risk. Number one, okay, is risk identification or identification of risk. Now, once I have identified the risk in banks, then we move on to understanding assessment of risk. How do you assess how much exposure does the banks face in their transaction, or what is the kind of effect that banks are facing, especially in the financial technology, the fintech, the online banking. So that is the second assessment of risk. You need to have it. And finally, the final process of risk management is the prioritizing of risk, because banks, they have to face risk no matter what. There is no business that is done without risk. In Islamic banks also, risk concept is also important, because you cannot do a business without taking risk. However, when you prioritize of risk in Islamic banks, we have a concept where we have a risk sharing. So that is very different compared to conventional banks. All right. So I have this student. Okay, admit. Okay. Okay. Now let us look into what is the definition of risk. So there is one definition we call risk is related to the probability. All right. Probability of what is happening. But in banks, we always look into the impact. What will happen to banks? And usually the impacts that is concerned about risk, usually it relates to unfortunate events, events that is not good, right? So anything that is bad to banks, we call that risk exposure. And there is another concept that is related to risk. We call that risk and return, all right? In investment especially, when you have risk, you have to also can higher the risk that the bank take, you have to commensurate, you have to receive higher return. That's why in investment classes, they use the concept high risk, high returns. But for Islamic banks, the Islamic bank cannot be exposed too much of risk, or we call that excessive risk taking, because that will lead to we call that activities that is exposing to the people that save their money, and it is not Sharia compliant when banks take excessive risk. We will discuss this one later. And finally, risk is always related to realizations of opportunity, which is the risk trade-off. So if you take certain business decision, so you have to forsake another opportunity. So that is concerns about risk. And when we talk about risk management, you have to do this in banks. You have to manage risk properly with the thinking of the benefits to the bank. So that is brings to the introduction for today's slide. Now, when we talk about the first what we call phase, which is identifying of risk, we need to understand the types of risk. So here today, I would like to brief to you what are the main types of risks that banks can face. There are two kinds of risk. In this slide, it says external risk and internal risk. Now, on the blue colored box, external risk represents anything that is outside the institution or banks. So that is very important. You have your demand of the product, that is external risk. Regulatory, which is the central bank, they are regulating the banks, so that is risk, right? Economical, right? Economical risk, for example, the situation of the growth of the country, for example, inflation rate and also employment rate. So that is economical. We have also socio-political risk. For example, when the government change in a country, so we have that social political risk. And then environmental. Environment risk is, for example, maybe you are facing flood, right? Situation that danger, the natural disaster, all right? So the next one, in the green box, we have internal risk. Now, internal risk talks about strategic, all right? The changes of the governance, changes of the ethics of the people. Internal is more inside the organization or the banks that relates to the stakeholders or the manager's behavior. We call this operational risk. Okay, the second one. And then finally, in the internal risk, we also have enablers, people that make the decision in the bank. Maybe people, so you have people being unemployed in banks. So those are internal risks. We call also enablers, technology, infrastructure. We have internal risk. For example, the need to have online banking, all right? The need to have digital banks. So when there is this need, so the risk of the bank doesn't update their technology. For example, using ATM, automated teller machines, right? That is updated, right, with security. Because in digitalization of banks, when we talk about technology, it's always relate to security. And now when you have digital banking or online banking, it is more so important to manage the risk, especially related to cyber security risk. So that is related. That's why this basic concept you must understand first. So that is internal risk. Now going to my second slide. Now we talk here types of risk. Okay, let me focus on three important elements: operational, hazard, and financial. All right. So operational, as we say, is internal risk. All right. We have operation controls. Okay. We have poor capacity management. Then we also have looking at the supply chain issue. Right. So especially in the COVID-19 situation, a lot of companies have to close down because they face supply chain problem. They cannot get goods from countries that is affected with COVID-19 because countries have to close their border, right? When the country entered a pandemic situation, so the government have to close the border. So when the government close the border, anything cannot move into a country. So that causes supply chain problem. And when that happens, banks will face companies failure because companies that unable to make sure that they continue their business, the supply chain, then the company cannot pay their debts. And when that happens, banks will face problem because losing customer, or maybe the loans that they receive become bad debts because company cannot continue operating. Can we continue on the second one, which is hazard risk? So as what I say, that one is related to external risk. So hazard like macroeconomic, right, political issues, legal issues, natural disasters, and terrorism. So that is hazard. And then the final one, the green one, financial. Now this one is always related to banks part because banks is always main focus is on financial. Now looking on financial, we have debt and interest rates, poor financial management, asset issue, and accounting problem. So that's why in today's topic, to understand risk, you also need to understand the regulation part of what banks have to follow. Now, okay, we want to summarize, not to summarize the lecture, but to summarize the risk, the types of risk, right? We can say that for banks, there are two nature of risk, whether it is Islamic bank or whether it is conventional banks. These two nature of risk is called systematic risk and unsystematic risk. Systematic risk is something where you cannot control by the banks. It is being controlled by macro. Everyone is impacting the risk. Whereas the green one, the unsystematic risk, okay, is something where it can be controlled by the organization, by the bank, by following a certain standard operating procedure. Now, when we talk about SOP, standard operating procedure, that is related to what we are having, right, in Malaysia, COVID-19. So that one, if we enforce the standard operating procedure, we control the risk or minimize the risk. So that is unsystematic in nature and it is micro. So now let us focus on, okay, I already explained. Now, to go into this nature, systematic risk, always we have three kinds of examples. Number one is market risk. Number two is interest rate risk. And number three is inflationary risk. Now, at the end of this, my discussion about this topic, I will talk about how to mitigate this systematic risk. Market risk, interest rate risk, and inflationary risk in banks. There are certain ways to mitigate the risk by conducting what you call banking activities. So the second point is unsystematic risk, the green one. Now we have examples is liquidity risk, credit risk, and operational risk. Now these are what you call things that we can control by banks. So banks, when you want to mitigate the unsystematic risk, they will make sure that they have this what you call liquidity risk mitigation. They have enough money to continue operation, because liquidity risk in banks is related to how much money the bank can have for meeting the customer requirement for deposit withdrawal. So that is the definition of liquidity in banks. If banks doesn't have enough liquidity, the bank will have a problem to honor the customer deposit withdrawal. So that is a very problematic situation in banks, which can happen. For example, a case during the credit crunch crisis in the year 2007, a bank named Northern Rock Bank, a bank based in London, right, in United Kingdom. They faced this liquidity risk because all of the money that the bank have and the securities that they have cannot be sold or cannot be liquidated, because they have the Northern Rock Bank have invested a lot in what you call credit investment, especially the mortgage-backed securities or MBS in United States, because during that time, the credit crunch, the investment in those assets become bad. And when that happens, the Northern Rock Bank faces liquidity problem. So the second one is credit risk. As you all know, credit risk is related to how the banks identify people that take the money from bank, the borrowers. So the eligibility of borrowers to pay back the loan, right, is being monitored by banks when the bank want to give out loan. So this is what we call credit risk, because if the borrower unable to pay back the money that the customer borrow, it will increase the credit risk. And finally, operational risk is where related to how the banks operate in day-to-day. Especially nowadays, when in the COVID-19 situation, you have operational risk where the branch of the bank cannot be open because the government said any institution, any businesses, including banks, cannot be open because they want to confine the situation. And when people cannot open, or the people to enter the bank cannot be as normal like previously, there is a standard operating procedure where banks have to protect their workers, to wear masks, right, to have the sanitizer, everything, it will impact the operation of the bank. And there is one example, and very true. Banks have to face operational risk, to close down the branch, or maybe to stop their staff from coming to work and work from home. How does the bank does the work from home for their employees? That's an operational risk. So that is the definition, the concept. Now, let me go into this very important thing that this topic wants to explain, that I want to explain to you, the nature of risk. Now, all of students that learns about Islamic finance needs to know the concept of Islamic bank before you can know about risk that Islamic bank faces. Now, I refer to this book, right? I have this book. So it is a very good book. So this book, right, by Groening and Iqbal, written in 2008, talks about risk analysis for Islamic banks, published by World Bank. And it highlights 6 principles that constitutes in the Islamic financial system. Number 1, of course, in Sharia, Sharia prohibits interest in their operation. Number 2, money as potential capital. So banks cannot treat money as what the conventional bank is. Number 3 is the risk sharing aspects for Islamic banks. And number 4 is prohibition of speculative behavior. That is very important for banks. They cannot make any decision too much to expose to risk. Number 5 is Sharia approved activities. They must have a Sharia board to advise the bank what to do, what is approved to be conducted by Islamic banks. And finally, in Islamic financial system, the last principle is social justice. As what in we have in Malaysia case, during this COVID-19, in the past 6 months, beginning in March 2020, right? Banks in Malaysia have given, we call this moratorium to all of the borrowers of loans, right? Of we call housing loan, car loan, anything that is related to paying during period of March until October, 6-month period, a moratorium, a grace period. So anyone during this period facing a problem to pay back the loan to the bank will have a grace period. They don't need to pay anything. Even in the interest rate, the government has said to the bank not to charge interest rate, not to increase what you call that payment, monthly repayments once the moratorium ended. So that is a very good social justice concept that is being exemplarized by Malaysian banking. Not only does the Islamic banks in Malaysia was given this principle, what you call moratorium, but customers from the conventional banks in Malaysia also receive moratorium. So all banks in Malaysia have conducted the moratorium, which will be ending in October 2020. Sorry, which is at the end of September. So beginning October, they have to pay normally. Okay. So that is the concept of social justice, and for risk is very important to understand. Now, let me talk about this concept we have here the risk theory in Islamic financial intermediation, very important. In Islamic financial system, right, we have here a set of contracts, which is most popular contracts that have in Islamic bank, I can say is mudarabah, murabahah, and musyarakah. So for those who are new to this concept, please take note of these three important concepts. Okay. Now I have to move on. Okay. Because I want to focus on these slides. Now, in the concept, in the understanding the nature of risk in banks, before we go on to the regulation. So once we have identified the risk, which is the first phase, right? The first step that we did just now. The second one is assessment of risk. You have to assess the risk. So one of the assessment tools that banks can conduct is using, we call asset liability management, ALM. Now, ALM is very important for you to know, right? So basically an ALM, asset liability management, is identifies the balance sheet, right? The accounting, right? Is an accounting term, but the concept how to implement ALM is that banks identify what they got, which is the asset, what they have to pay, which is the liability. And they have to match between the asset and liability to have what you call amount similar, right, together. Not to exceed or not to what you call undermine the value, the amount. So when you have asset liability management, banks are able to know the situation of the financial situation of banks and mitigate with the right strategy. Now the strategy part, I will come to the end of the slide, talking about the market risk just now. So in ALM, we have the asset. So for Islamic banks, we have basically three kinds of asset. Number one is financing asset. So you have categories, for example, mudarabah contract, salam assets, ijarah, istisna. So those are financing assets. You have to know the difference between mudarabah, salam, ijarah, istisna. If not, it's going to be very difficult for you to continue. All right. In investment asset, you have mudarabah asset, musyarakah asset type. Okay. And in asset also, you have fee-based services, right? Jualah and kifalah. So you categorize, Islamic banks categorize this asset according to these types, and then it balances with the liability. So on the liability, you have the demand deposit. So in demand deposit is typically an amanah. So any money that the banks is taking from customers, deposits, right? People save, is considered an amanah. And banks, when they take up the money deposit, right? That's why the Islamic bank doesn't pay interest. Different than conventional bank. Islamic bank, when they take up the money, they have to know what kind of contract it is. But most usually, right, is deposit is amanah. So when banks use up the money, right, it is under a certain contract. For example, musyarakah, very simple. There is or maybe mudarabah, right, where the banks become the entrepreneur and the customer become the person that is give, mudarib, give the money. So once the entrepreneur uses the money and any what we call profit that is taking because of the use of the money, the entrepreneur, which is the bank, they have what I call they can share the profit because they take up the money from the depositors, and they can pay as much as what the bank wants. Maybe not all, because they have to have a profit sharing ratio, but it is something that Islamic bank adapts to pay, when they take deposits, then they have to pay something. And then finally, under liability is we have this special investment account. So now, next one, risk category. Let's learn a little bit of this category. So basically, you have in the banks, these are the categories that needs to focus. You have, because banks are not only that they take up deposit money, but actually banks right now, they diversify their operation. They have to promote new product, design new product for customers. So they have product design. Banks also, they are involved in system software. They have to use what you call, and now in the industry revolution 4.0, they use, banks are using artificial intelligence to help bankers to make the decision. So you have a system for artificial intelligence, AI, to get big data information that is big data, and to use it as data analytics for banks. They must use a good system. Now manufacturing, so banks does not involve really much in manufacturing. We have also categories like, say for example, others, customer services. So banks are involved with customer service, because still, even though that especially in the pandemic 19, customer doesn't walk in normally in the banks, but banks have call centers, right? So they have people to entertain through the phone banking. So banks have customer service that they have to monitor and manage. And then banks also have project management, because in Islamic banks also, they manage projects, because in Musyarakah, because Islamic banks and also Mudarabah, okay, banks have to be the one that manages the project, right? Not as takers or givers of loan. Now that is conventional bank, very different. And finally, in the risk category is quality. So banks, they have to manage quality. All right. So in quality, we call this audit system, right? To check the quality of the banks, we have auditing system. So it's very much related to banks. Now I have this risk category, but let me go on. Financial, we have financial, operational strategies. Now we have here these categories: financing, okay? We have capacity, customization. So these are risk categories that once you have made, understand the parts of risk that needs to be identified, then you want to assess the risk, then you have to prioritize the risk. This is the third part, prioritize which one comes first. So by identifying the risk categories, you want to prioritize. Number one, looking at the profitable growth. Which of the components will be impact to the bank? Okay, looking in the banks also, the second category is low price. So in banks, looking at the cost and profit. So how much will be exposed? The third part category is development of new product. Okay, which one is important? And then finally, leverage of technology. So these four important components will help banks to prioritize the risk. And once you prioritize the risk, you can segregate risk categories according to the risk tolerance. This is the risk tolerance. Stakeholders' risk appetite, we call that also. So there are two kinds of institutions or stakeholders in the industry. Number one, the one that is on the red color, exceeding risk appetite, very much likely to take risk more. Number two is the blue one, within risk appetite. Now, if you look at the graph here, right? Now, those in the blue colored box, the within risk type, they can have what we call looking at the risk and also how will it impact the organization. We can also relate to risk and return concept. So for within the risk appetite, they can achieve a certain amount of profit, income, but they are only mitigated to a certain degree of risk. So that's why you have the blue one. Risk is less likely to happen because their income, the impact is low. If you see here, high for the blue column, but the return is low. The impact is low because why? Because they are taking risk appetite. When you have stakeholders are in the risk appetite condition, they will always control the amount of risk that the bank will expose through standard operating procedures, to risk mitigation technique, through capital. Capital is very important for banks. If the bank want to be exposed to higher risk, the bank will prepare more capital. Now, how does the bank prepare more capital? The bank can either borrow from the money market or they increase the people deposits in the bank. So these are the behavior of within risk appetite. But for the red colored box, okay, exceeding risk appetite. Now, this kind of institution or stakeholders, they will demand more returns by taking higher risk, by exposing the bank to higher risk. Maybe the way that they want to expose to higher risk is they open up the barriers of risk. They will not comply to risk management. Now, that is exceeding risk appetite. Okay, taking more risk, exposing the bank with more exposure. Maybe the one in the red color, they will forsake the capital. Maybe because it's very hard for the bank to increase the capital that is needed by the regulators. But because they want faster profit, better profit, they are willing to take. Now, when that happens, that is what we call exceeding risk appetite, which for me is not a good behavior. And bankers, if they behave like that, exceeding risk appetite, this is a very dangerous behavior for banks. And as I said before, in Islamic banking principle, you cannot be too exposed to risk too much. Okay, so that is one of the Sharia principle. Speculative risk you cannot in banks, Islamic bank. So that's why we also look into this second slide related to risk tolerance. Okay, so you have a lot of problem in banks is always in IT problem. That's for sure. So that's why when we talk about digital banking, we always look into the systemic framework, computer system, data. How does the bank prepare their data center? Because any information is all data for banks. Custom information, right? Now we have this algorithm to analyze the customer's behavior, to make sure that the bank are able to have credit scoring. Credit scoring is where banks make the decision to give the loan to customer. So using the technology, better technology, the bank can use artificial intelligence to make decision. Now, this data to feed the artificial intelligence will use a lot of data, right? Algorithms, right? For computing processes and we call data analytics. The bank will require a lot of data to use that, but there is more efficient than manual assessment that is being done by bankers previously. And when you have this data analytics, artificial intelligence, it will fasten the process of banks to deliver the product and helps the banks to conduct the banking online, digital banking. So that is number one situation, IT problem. Number two, you have this loss of key managers that is rampant because bankers, they can leave the bank and work in another bank. Okay, you also have here number the last one, product and service of quality. So this one is less likely to happen and the impact is lower to banks because banks are always improve their service quality by simply changing the mindset of the employer, right, through a better SOP. Okay, so if you look at the IT problem, the impact here is very high, right? But the likelihood is not very much, but it's very high. So, okay, now let me spend a little bit of time. Dr. Dimas, do I have time?
Yes, you have another 5 minutes, Doctor, please.
Okay, let me summarize with these 5 categories. I will share this slide with everyone, right? So I expect that if you have any question, you can ask me. But let me give you these 5 categories. We have credit risk, liquidity risk, operational risk, legal risk, and market risk. Now, these are the 5 categories. You can look at it. That is related to bank, right? So you have here, okay, there's a lot of slide. No problem. Okay. Okay. Now, let me tell you, how does the bank manage the risk? The bank can have, first thing is market exposure risk. So you have one that is actual, another one is expected. Always there are 2 kinds, actual and expected. But always, banks always look further in the future. They want to find the expected exposure, which is a contingent and unconfirmed. So, and always, this one, banks, okay, actual exposure, the banks also involved in foreign exchange exposure. They also involved in interest taking. This is conventional, okay. So for Islamic bank, they are more on the, we call this fee-based payment received, okay. And then immediate and future confirmed borrowings of investment, okay. Expected, okay, cash flow. This one is about bonds. So usually banks, when they invest the money, they will invest in financial markets. It consists of bonds, money market. So it is expected because it is based on the flow of interest rate. Now, what does the bank do? 3 things. Number one, they fully cover. We call that 100% hedge. Now, this is the concept. Okay, 100% hedge, which is full cover. Number 2, do nothing. Sometimes the bank doesn't do nothing. Let the event happen in the risk, in the market risk. Number 3 is hedge partially, which is having some cover. For example, insurance. So when bank involved in certain activities, they want to protect themselves, looking at the risk appetite, they say, I want to protect. So they buy certain cover. This is called hedge partially. Okay. Now, lastly, I want to talk about governance, okay, risk regulation. So it's important that governance play a role in mitigating risk and also to make sure that the bank follow regulation. Capital regulation, as right now we have Basel III right? So later on, we'll be having Basel IV, liquidity requirement, capital regulation, right? But what is important for Islamic Bank is looking at this process in this slide. So for Islamic Bank, most importantly, is to ensure that the banks follow regulation. For Islamic Bank, they must go through this step. Okay. Differences between conventional and Islamic bank is this: Sharia audit. That's it. Okay. So if the bank doesn't compromise a good Sharia advisor, a good Sharia committee, then it's very hard for banks to manage the risk and manage the regulation. So I think that's all. If you have any question, please ask here today. I am willing to help you. So Dr. Dimas, thank you.
Alhamdulillah, most welcome, Dr. Muazzam. Very interesting and enlightening presentation and discussion from him. You see, dear participants, Dr. Muazzam has in detail explained about the management concept and the practice in the case of Islamic banks, and also banking in general. I can get some important point from his presentation just now, that either Islamic or professional bank cannot avoid the risk because of the maybe complicated activities that they have been doing, particularly looking at the balance sheet, asset and liability that seems to be cannot be matching each other. Yeah. Here, I open some questions to the floor. Maybe you have some comments or feedback to the Dr. Muazzam. Please raise your hand, or you can just write in the chat. Please, brothers, introduce your name, institution, and your question, please. Any questions, please, dear participants?
Hello.
Okay, please, brother.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuh. First of all, thank you, Dr. Dimas, for giving me the floor. And then I will start by wishing my Indonesian people happy and prosperous independence. Doctor, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm learning a lot. Basically, going towards my question,
Please mention your name, brother, and your country, your institution, please.
Yeah, my name is Sekou Gassama. I'm from the Gambia, West Africa. I'm currently in Indonesia here, studying masters in accounting at University of Airlangga, Surabaya. Okay, so going to my question, you talked about the risk management and stuff like that, and then in finance, when you talk about risks, obviously we all know the way we deal with risks in finance perhaps may be different from the Islamic perspective of it. And that really impressed me, because I learned a lot from your presentation here within this short period of time. But if you look at this statement, the higher the risks, the higher the profit. If you looked at this statement, what is your view to this stand in the Islamic perspective? Is this in line with Islamic perspective? If not, what should we do as Muslims in dealing with our risks in businesses? Should we also consider the higher the risk, the higher the profit? Or how should we handle our risk status of our businesses? And the other question will be, are you getting me, doctor?
Yes, please, doctor, please. Yes, brother, please, continue.
Okay, how can the Islamic bank be perfect if they are operating under principles and policies of conventional financial system? I talked about, I don't know of much, I don't have much knowledge about Indonesia or per se Malaysia. I know they are very advanced in Islamic banking and finance, but in my country, that's the case, because you have a system whereby the rates and everything is determined by the conventional banks, the central bank, which is operating there, where their reserves are kept and stuff like that, and they are purely operating under a conventional financial system. How can, in that situation, how can we have a perfect Islamic banking financial system, and what do we need to do to remedy to get a perfect Islamic banking system?
Okay, thank you very much, brother.
Yeah.
Saifu.
Okay.
Okay, doctor, he can respond directly getting with his question, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dimas. Thank you, Gasama. Okay. I received this question, I think very interesting. Okay. Now, what is mentioned about the slide, high risk, high return. Now, the principles that we actually look first is risk sharing. One of the important principles of Islamic banks. Now, let me ask you, okay, if you are now risk sharing, you are also taking the risk. Okay, Gasama, will you want to take good risk or negative risk? Because in investment, there are positive risk and negative risk. Risk that is good and risk that is bad. So which one do you take?
Yeah, I will go for the good one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to take good, do you want to take it a lot that is over than your capacity? Because even though it is a good risk, but it is still risk, uncertainty, right?
Yeah, obviously. It should be within, I will prefer within my capacity.
So under the concept of Islamic finance, okay, risk sharing and risk taking, do you want to take more? Because that is the concept that I want you to know. Or you want to take manageable risk?
I want manageable.
Yeah, because that is very, very important. In Islamic banks, where it's different, yes, there is the concept of high risk and high returns. All right, in any organization, it's the same. Whether it is conventional banks or Islamic, any risk that you have to take must be commensurated with profit. Because if you don't have profit, you cannot pay for the salary of the workers and everything. However, to go in line with the Islamic, the Sharia principles in Islamic finance, Islamic bank, they have to also follow the risk sharing and risk taking, which is very different than conventional bank. Because in conventional, whatever exposure that they have in loans, they will transfer the risk to another party, which is normally the borrower, right? For example, last time during the credit crunch crisis, right? The situation happened in conventional banks where they offer the loans to people without the proper credit risk assessment and cannot pay the loan. They are expecting the conventional bank, right, are expecting that they can sell out the exposure of this credit crunch loan to another party. And they are the originator of this credit mortgage loan. They actually, when they give the money, actually they at the same time they sell this contract to another, because in investment we call that derivatives, which is not acceptable in Islamic banks and not being practiced. So in conventional, they can do the high profit, high return, because they are not limited only to this what you call return that they can get from the income, but also from the derivative market. But for Islamic bank, even though that they take the risk, high risk, but the risk, the profit that they will get is manageable profit, or we call this not excessive profit. That is very important concept in Islamic bank. And all of you must understand the difference of this between excessive profit and reasonable profit. Because of in Sharia, you cannot take excessive profit or unjustifiable profit that will hurt another party. because we have this social justice, right? So with that thinking, that's why whatever it is, high risk and high profit for Islamic bank is all about managing risk properly, right? No business comes without no profit. That's for sure. For the second question, how to create a perfect banking or perfect Islamic bank system. Now, let me tell you, the knowledge that you have, especially in this, we call the Islamic banking. Okay, we categorize all this knowledge as fiqh muamalat. It's not fiqh muamalat. The concept is that this is the knowledge of communication between human and human. There's nothing perfect with this fiqh muamalat. And what is confined with Islamic bank, I want to bring, it is not perfect. Malaysia tried to create a perfect Islamic banking system, a perfect Islamic economic system, but it is not perfect, right? Other countries have tried. Singapore have tried to be the best Islamic banking, but even though that we want to have a perfect Islamic banking concept, it's always change. That's why in fiqh muamalat, the knowledge of Islamic finance or Islamic banking is always ever changing. So I will comment that there will be no perfect Islamic banking because the needs of human, in fiqh muamalat is always changing because of time, because of problem, because of the needs, especially in this pandemic, right? But the principles that the Islamic or the Sharia base, which is the Quran and the Sunnah, always follow, must follow. So if you want to have a perfect Islamic banking system, it must answer to the Sharia principles first. If the bank wants to follow a perfect Islamic banking system, it must fulfill the needs of the Ummah, the Islamic Ummah. Then, if you are able to, there's no terms perfect. The only thing that we want in Islamic bank is to have an alternative banking system other than conventional. I think I have that question.
Thank you, Dr. Waizam. Very enlightening answer. And I personally agree with you, Doctor, that in terms of risk and profit, both of them are working hand in hand, actually. And but the risk that taken by the bank should be manageable risk, so that the profit generated from the risk itself can lead to the sustainable banking operation, like that. So whatever risk that the bank wants is okay, but as long as this profit and the risk is lead to the sustainable banking operation in the midst of existing financial turbulence, for example. And the second one, I do agree with you also, Doctor, that there's not any perfect banking system in the world, but we as human beings are trying to benefit much to the society at large, in particular to the Ummah, by promoting the banking sector, Islamic banking sectors. Okay, any other comments or questions to Dr. Muazzam? Or maybe in the chat here, we have a question, Doctor, from our sister from Universitas Jember, East Java. She questioning about how to calculate the risk in the banking. Is there any formula to measure the risk, and how risk management can be solved from the priority? Maybe you have any idea, Doctor, please.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much for this question number by Novilia. Now, as I mentioned, that after you identify the risk, and then you want to assess the risk. So one of the assessment tools that can be used is asset liability management. It's very simple. And when you want to calculate the risk, you need to calculate based on the 5 categories, especially the financial risk type, which is the credit risk, right? Operational risk. So on the slide, there are ways to calculate credit risk, the formula, but it's very extensive. But you can learn more on the advanced level, but basically the most simple tool to calculate risk in banking is ALM. As long as you balance it and make sure enough money. For example, if a bank wants to spend money for investment in a high risk, for example, loan, they want to give a loan in syndicated loan, right? A company, big company, but the big company doesn't have a very good credit rating. So what will happen, right? On the ALM side, the asset will become big. So how to mitigate the risk? How to know how to mitigate is to increase the capital, the liability side. So the liability have to increase commensurate with the asset size, the loans that the bank want to give. So the amount of capital or the amount that the bank wants to take the deposit, the bank have to promote deposit lah, if they want to increase the number of people save money with the bank. So that is a simple way to calculate risk. Thank you, Dr. Dimas.
Okay, most welcome, Doctor. Usually, Doctor, right now I'm also doing simple research on measuring the risk on Islamic Bank in Indonesia by looking at 24th province in Indonesia, Doctor. And I do agree with you that we have to measure the risk of each particular bank by trying to look at looking for the threshold, Doctor. So we are setting the threshold to what extent the tolerated risk is tolerated in particular banks. So if for example, car capital adequacy ratio beyond that threshold, it means that the banks is going to be crashed. Or maybe if the car is beyond or below that particular threshold, it means that the bank is quite stagnant. So from your explanation just now, I do become more understand that the risk management in banking, actually we have to deal with the certain particular tolerated points or threshold, whereby this tolerated risk or threshold can be seen as the benchmark, in particular for the policymakers, in order to whether interventions needed or not, in a particular period of times. And also, second, Doctor, I'm just worrying about the you mentioned in the earlier slide, there is external risk, the risk coming from the macroeconomic environment, for example, whereby this external risk somehow is exogenous, beyond our control. So my question is, do we need also to set a tolerated threshold for the external risk, so that if this exogenous risk coming from outside the banking sectors, so the banking sectors can readily respond whether this dangerous or not dangerous? Need your advice, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much. So the situation right now, as you know, that the capital adequacy ratio, which was came out by the Basel Committee, the BIS, I think is already quite some time being applicable. And I believe with the current scenario, what is happening in the banking sector, one day it will be irrelevant, the CAR ratio. Now, why I say that, is because of digitalization, okay, and the effect of other assets available to consumer to save their money. For example, cryptocurrency. This is digital money. So all in all, what we face by banks, this formalization of to mitigate the risks that the bank have, calculation to meet the standard regulatory requirement given by the central bank, one day will become insignificant because the complexity of the data that the bank will need to analyze, not only on the consumer banking side, but also on the investment side. We talk about data analytics. So a lot of feed is going to come about the changes of consumer behavior. How the social media is impacting the decision of certain people to save the money. So it is very alien language to bankers, especially for us academicians, when we say, oh, we can measure it with CAR, capital adequacy ratio. But I believe for the future research, we cannot depend only on CAR to be the benchmark, because data is data, all right? Data can be manipulated, and what is important is that any banks that or Islamic bank that wants to improve their what we call compliance, risk compliance to the regulators' requirement, especially with the new standards, right? Basel IV, right, coming up. We must ensure that the people, the bankers, the managers that is involved with the decision makers understand that the most important data that is relevant, especially in the bank, is human. We have to go back to the organics and external, the uncontrollable. Yes, it is becoming more wider. You cannot anticipate what's happening, outside. But all these can be captured with that big data. Many sources of data from social media and everything to triangulate for future events. And this is where for bank, in order for them to calculate the credit risk, all the ratios risk, they have to know also some form of not ratio, but some form of understanding of what is happening human around them, because data is just data, but comprehension of data is more important. What makes the world changing? It's not about data. It's not the CAR ratio, because CAR ratio is benchmark. But what's happening is what is leading to the CAR ratio to change. So I think this is very exhaustive topic. I don't want to debate, but what is being conducted by BIS, they always want to make sure the bank doesn't repeat mistakes that they have done in the credit crunch crisis. Right? Because of the credit problem, right? That's why they come up with new regulatory requirement, CAR ratio and everything, which is troublesome for us to understand. But however, we must upgrade ourselves, knowing that now it's not about ratios, CAR ratio, or what. It's about you developing yourself to become more understandable, to understand data science is more relevant. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for the enlightening answer. Okay, participants, whether you have any other question, comments, and feedback to Dr. Muazzam, please. Or maybe the student of Dr. Muazzam, you have any questions? We have so many students from UUM, Doctor, by the way, here. But I don't know whether they are joining us today. But some of them are following our program since the beginning. Okay, please, sisters, brothers, any other comments, questions about risk management? Okay, here, Doctor, we have a question from the chat from Brother Anggi here. He questioned about how to determine leading indicators in measuring the risk of Islamic and conventional banking. Doctor, maybe you have any comment, Doctor?
Okay, leading indicators is something where you want some economic indicators to tell you what will be what I call indicate situation that will lead this risk to increase or decrease in the future. So basically, if I can refer back to the slide, if I may, Let me share again. Because if, oh, I already closed, never mind. So basically, there are 5. So number 1 is credit risk. I give you example, credit risk. So to know the leading indicator to measure credit risk is look at what you call the spending behavior of people. So looking at the salary, right? Employment of the people in the country. So if a country is having a high unemployment, okay, the probability for the credit risk to increase, whether it is Islamic or conventional, is very high. So that's one point. Looking into market risk. So in market risk, the leading indicator is interest rate changes, because market risk is related to the pricing of assets. So one of the sources that you can find, which I am using now in University Utara Malaysia, we have data where we subscribe Bloomberg. So in Bloomberg, they have a lot of information that give you the economic data, market data. So it's very good question to ask, because in becoming a successful banker, you must understand the importance of what kind of data is needed, because data you cannot just simply define it as just statistics. You have to see the data, the meaning of data. For example, the money supply that the central bank gives to combat inflation risk, inflation increase, right? So why does the central bank reduces the interest rate, right, to combat the COVID-19? So those are meaningful questions that can be answered by understanding the leading indicators, and by knowing where can you find the data is also very important. Another site, okay, I can show you this important data. If you can open your website, I will open my website. I will share this website. Okay, let me share. It's quite a good question. Hold on. Okay. So, can you see my screen on Google? Oh, cannot see. Okay. So I'm going to type investing.com. So you can see this site, investing.com.
Yes, doctor.
So this is a very good site where free, anyway, you don't need to pay. You can have a lot of information. For example, you want to look into stock market, forex, commodities, cryptos. You can also find information about economic information, news. Okay, so this is always an important website for students, whether they are in banking or whether they are in Islamic finance, bank or investment. So this is where you can source out information that you want to understand those impact to risk. So here, economic indicators. Okay, so this is one important aspect. Sorry, sorry, I'm showing you differently. Okay, sorry. Let me type investing.com. Okay. So this is the website, investing.com. So you can see news, right? You can see analysis, market overview. Let me open up the news and open up the economic calendar. Okay. So I think there's a question I want to answer that this week.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. Maybe last questions here, Brother Pratama. You raise your hand, brother. Please ask the question. Mention your name and your institution to Dr. Muazzam. Please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dimas. For Dr. I have a question. My name is Raden Kuning Srinda Pratama, and I'm student at Sriwijaya University, Universitas Sriwijaya, Palembang. Let us discuss about financial inclusion. Maybe we know that financial inclusion is the important variable or instrument to reduce the poverty and income inequality, particularly when the poor people can access financing themselves. That's why the government, probably each of country, makes the policy to encourage the financial inclusion. But in other side, banks, even Islamic banks, have 5 C's concept of credit or financing. My question is, number one, is the financial inclusion is the financial inclusion concept a risk for Islamic bank? And number two, because in Islamic bank has a social concept, what the role does Islamic bank reach financial inclusion, particularly credit or financing sector, then also minimize the risk? Maybe just it. Thank you for attending. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, brother, for your question. So, doctor, if I'm not mistakenly pick up his question, is that how to balance between the financial inclusion concept and the risk management in banking sectors. And the second question related with the social function of Islamic bank in regard to the financial inclusion in existing situations. Could you please just respond, Doctor?
Okay, I think let me answer the second question first, which is the financial inclusion, because the first question I can answer it very straightforward. Now, if you look at who are those that is not included, that is unbankable, that's what inclusion is, right? You want to include everybody in the system. So definition by the United Nations and everybody in the Sustainable Development Group, okay, SDG, okay, you want to include everybody. And those that is unbankable, socially not included, is those that cannot borrow money from banks because they don't have a good credit history. All right? If they don't have a good credit history, so traditional banks, they cannot give money or they cannot give out loan. So when the banks cannot give out loan to those that is not financial inclusion, so it will be a failure. The bank cannot proceed. Now, this is not the problem about policy. This is the what you call how the traditional bank are thinking about credit risk. Now, whether it is conventional or Islamic, right? The main concern that the bank wants to give out financing to people is how can the bank assess the risk. So if right now, if you want to have inclusion, right? The only solution that the banks have to think for inclusion of financing is the bank have to expand their credit rating assessment to calculate the risk by using other form of assessment, which include social media assessment. This is a very interesting topic, because in social media assessment, the customers, they provide information about how the customers are continue to pay their phone, right, on time, okay, to the telephone cellular company. How frequent that they pay? Do they miss the payment or not? There is one record, right? You are using the phone, okay, technology, and building up credit history, okay, the information about what is the form of information that can be gathered when people are communicating in WhatsApp. How is the customer that wants to borrow is communicating about business they want to sell something online, you know, because a lot of people, they don't have a good record about their employment. A lot of people right now, the unbankable, right, they are doing online business, okay, so a lot of transaction is done social media, right? So people in the market, right, in the villages, right, they all have the access of technology, the handphone. So it is about the bank to change their mindset about using credit rating, credit history, to give loans to those who are not included or are categorized as unbankable, because you want to have financial inclusion. Everyone can borrow money. Everyone can go to the bank and open an account. The bank have to use data analytics to analyze data from the social media. That's why I say that the bank are going to digital. But in the end, it's about how banks are preparing themselves to receive and change their infrastructure of data analysis. Right, to change. It's not about following the regulatory requirement, capital adequacy ratio or not. It's because in order to become a new bank that will include those financial inclusion, promotes the SDG, the bank have to transform into a social bank. There's a new form, social bank. Whether it's conventional or Islamic, right? They have to become a social banker. Because why? Because now it's not about giving service to a certain few. Only a few can go bank. No, it's about giving the service and giving the banking activity to all. So by becoming a bank that adapt to technology, because in order for you to measure, you know, phones, payment and everything, you need to have data analytics. You need to have big data. You need to use artificial intelligence, because this cannot be done through manual work. People people working in the credit department, they cannot have time to calculate, because all this data is coming from social media. It's coming from WhatsApp, it's coming from Facebook, Twitter and everything, because everyone is communicating. But what source of data and everything that is communicated, then the bank have to come up with a computer system, work together with financial technology. Fintech companies is very important, so that they can serve more people and have the financial inclusion. So, and the first question, okay, sorry, I take a lot, is that bank, how does the bank want to become better? Is by becoming more adaptable. Very short, but is what we want to have. I think I get the question.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I hope Brother Pratama, your question has been answered by Doctor. If you don't feel that your question is not yet answered, you can personally email him, inshallah, in the end of the program. Okay, any other questions, sisters, brothers, before we end the program in a couple of minutes? Any questions or any comment, feedback? Okay, Doctor, before we end the program, I have just a bit, maybe a question to you, Doctor. Have you got any info about indexation as a source to measure the risk management in banking sector, Doctor?
I have not come to that area of research. Can you explain a little bit? Maybe I can recall.
Here that right now in Bank Indonesia, for example, they develop some index for measuring some risks coming from the banking sectors. So they try to index in the form of composite index. So this index covers some risks that considered to be the risk in Islamic bank, and then they compose into a single index, and then this index is referred by the central bank to measure to what extent risk has been go beyond or maybe move up and down. Maybe you have any experience or you have any observations so far about this kind of approach, Doctor?
Okay, as you mentioned about capital adequacy ratio, CAR, okay, it is an index actually that was being used by bankers and also regulators. So the research, maybe indexation is also can be done, right, to calculate all of those risks, whether it is capital risk, which is CAR, whether it is operational risk or market risk. And one thing that maybe in Malaysian experience is that when, for example, banks unable to meet the requirement or capital adequacy ratio, right, the central bank will come and knock the door, and this information can be indexed, right, same like the stock market, it can be indexed. However, right, the data for this index maybe is not being shared by the public to the public, right? It's only for the regulators to see, because it's always looking at balancing the credit risk, and in credit risk, money market and everything, financial market is all interrelated. So maybe we have the index, but the data is very exclusive to certain institution, which I have not been crossed over lah.
Okay, Doctor, time goes too fast. So we have been here almost 2 hours. And dear participants, Alhamdulillah, we have already got some valuable information from Dr. Muazzam about risk management concept, practices, and also some issues, either in conventional or Islamic banks. And also, Dr. Muazzam mentioned about some risks and the mitigated risks. And also the last one is that how we deal with some issues with the financial inclusion and other issues. But in the end, we agree that risk management concept is very important for Islamic banks in order to maximize the values of Islamic bank, and also to ensure that Islamic bank can smoothly run the process so that it can benefit much to the society as alternative Islamic banking operation. Dr. Muazzam, before we end the discussion, maybe do you have any comments or maybe any suggestion to us as the participant here, that majority of them coming from bachelor degree in finance, economics, concerning the risk management, Doctor, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe that risk is always change. Similar to human always change, right? But the most important thing when you want to learn about risk management is always try to find out what is the purpose when you want to study about risk management. Is it want to fulfill the regulatory requirements only, right? Or you want to ensure that you are become more compliant, right, based on the data and everything? Or as a student of risk management, do you want to become a person that well manage the risk? And also, do you practice risk management in your life? Very simple. So make the habit, when you want to learn risk management, always think about, do you manage risk in your life? For example, in your wallet, in your pocket, right? So do you spend a lot to buy clothes when you don't have money, or you don't have money, you want to keep money slowly every month to buy the clothes? So that is the very simple concept. Apply what you learn in daily life, so you can understand the what you call very hard concept in risk management. Thank you very much, Dr. Dimas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muaizam. Very humble and very best practice suggestion to us. Okay, dear participants, time's running out. First of all, and lastly, I would like to thanks to Dr. Muaizam from Universitas Utara Malaysia for his presentation and very good materials today. Yeah, and I wish that you can get some knowledge and understanding on risk management concept from him. And inshallah, we will share his material upon his approval to you through our My Class platform, inshallah. Okay, doctor, that's all for our discussion today. Inshallah, see you again on the next sessions. Please send our regards to your head departments and dean at University Utara Malaysia.
Okay.
And thank you very much. Inshallah, we will have another discussion, dear participants, at 1 p.m. today until 3 p.m. with our another speaker from Brunei Darussalam. With that, let's close our session with Hamdulillah together. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, doctor.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, doctor.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone.
This program is quite interesting. these events. May Allah bless us and always give us health and iman. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.